Well, I think we are now segueing into the next session, which is a session that looks back and forth. And I think life is like that. We also heard Mani speaking about how there is only so much that we can listen to the poetry here. And probably, you could catch with poets and writers offline. And somewhere, Amita, I just feel that, it weaves into the thing of longing.
Yeah.
That's so much a theme in poetry, isn't it?
Yeah. You know what? As a poet myself, there's one thing that keeps coming back to me, and that is a small quote by Maya Angelou. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And I really relate to that. And the session that preceded this was all about expressing, I heard Margaret say, this poetry, this genre of poetry may be called feminist or womanist. But I think as a writer, as a poet, if you have a story to tell, you just have to say it, regardless of genre.
Yeah, and of course, even in the earlier session when we had Janvi speaking to many other writers and saying, what is the inner compulsion to write? The hardest to speak about. Yeah?
True.
So, and like the gentleman there said that, you love poetry so much that you dare not even attempt writing it. So that is somewhere at the heart of the writer and the poet's dilemma. And on that note, we welcome you to the next session, which is looking back and forth. May we, with a round of applause, welcome Arjun Rajendran and Rohan Chhetri, please.
Given any instructions as to how to go about this, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It says looking back and forth, and most of my poems actually seem to have this kind of I try to write longer poems, and they're very, very narrative, and it sort of gives me that space to meditate and go to different places, and most of it works by association. So I think we have both decided that we will start with something to do with fire, and something to do with sort of absolution by fire, or something along those lines, fire and death. And then we will sort of take it forward as we go along. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. So,
Right.
So Rohan will read his poem on fire. So,
this poem is called The Intelligence of Hunger. The homeless outside their bright tents camped on the pavement along César Chavez, pouring water over their napes in the heat. I wrote down, the history of architecture is also a history of oppression. A brush fire spreading down the barren hills that afternoon, diffusing a dirty orange glow across the LA skyline, like a giant hang drum eaten by verdigris turned upside down. A small poem gets written in our sleep beneath the din of enormous questions stomping the streets. As a child, I slept through earthquakes, through gunfire, slept through the wailing of grown men flogged in the youth clubs taken over by the troops. The herd of elephants maddened with hunger, marching the streets by night, foraging our alleys in the blind, then going back the same way across the river to the forest before dawn. Yesterday, I told her I cannot write of love anymore. She laughed, but I pray that I may never have to drag again the hollow of my bones over that tattered parchment teethed by the old suffering hounds. Where I live now, every sound I make has the half note of loss. I watch the quiet mountain withstand, drought-ridden, watching the Pacific break froth at its feet every morning. Sometimes I hear the wind rasping through the chaparral and think of the fire followers in their late style of hunger. The giant coreopsis that will bloom despite the dryness for 3 bright weeks in April. I wanted to write about these. Wildflowers, grace, not grief. Thirst in the shape of a deer come down from the canyons to browse on the wet grass as the sprinklers go off at sundown. But everything here leads me to the man they found inside the gutted Chevy on his driveway the morning after. The brush fire still raging down parts of Lost Valley, the wire of his hands fastened to the wheels, body arched backwards into the cindered upholstery, and the seatbelt singed through a shirt button onto his ribs. At the time I heard about it, they still hadn't identified his body, nor had they found out if he had a wife, lover, or a child. But I kept thinking for some reason he must have tried to wait it out on the Porsche, watching the flames leaping downhill like it was running away from itself, trying to douse itself with dirt and shadow and bramble, and the man must have felt a kind of pity for its widening mouth coming down slow to make a dry and sudden feast of where he stood. On that deck, his father once hammered to the ground. The end of his flight, like the end of the son of Daedalus, the simple yellow heat playing on his wet face, already lit with alcohol, this new warmth slowly shocking him into a terrible rage, and his final thought I'll leave you with, him wondering just where the fuck he left the car keys. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohan. So I'm going to follow that up with a short poem that sort of thematically speaks to what Rohan just read, but it's not about wildfires or brush fires, it's about a funeral pyre. And it's called Pyre. We were on the playground when smoke from the pyre billowed above our heads. We tried stoning the sky to see if it could hit a skull behind all the dark energy. Birds crashed into these pillars of truth as if the rest of their flight were mere illusion. We stood in awe, watching the wind eat every morsel, lick its fingers clean in the dusk. And all that was left of the pyre by morning was a trapezoid of ash and buffalo piss. Do you want me to read, Anda, or read a few more? Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll read one called Interviewing Beatrice. Okay, I just hate the corporate recruitment process, the kind of questions they ask, your strengths, your weaknesses, but you like your mother-in-law, so on and on. So this poem just came out of that. So what I'm doing here is replacing the interviewee. I mean, I'm using a beetroot as a trope, and so this poem is called Interviewing a Beetroot. First, boil it with your eyes. Highlight some keywords in the resume. Organic, pesticide, Monsanto. Ask about its strengths. If it says, I've always been fresh, look unimpressed. A successful interviewer treats all beetroots like fungi. Ask its weaknesses. The answer doesn't matter, only the tone. A precision to match the trajectory of your pea to its naphthalene home. Use seconds to guess if the beetroot has any bones. You're the man, and real men don't fear beetroots. Assess if it's overqualified for Poriel, underqualified for borscht. Smile, smile, always keeping in mind how a beetroot is colored, a potato isn't. A beetroot will hemorrhage the pot, turn it a commie red. So never offer a beetroot a chance to be anything but a salad.
The poem that I read and the one I'll be reading from now is from this very small chapbook that is coming out. Afterwards, I'll be reading from the book of poems that was published a year ago. But for now, I'm going to read a dream, sort of a prose. It's a prose poem, but it sort of originated as a dream. And it is... It's called Revenants, as in the film, of course. And someone's going to eat a raw liver afterwards. I'm watching a TV show set in what looks like my hometown. And it's about the dead returning. The one being interviewed is a ponytailed priest, white-haired, mild-spoken, buttoned up in a black cassock. He looks uneasy now as he begins to unravel the exact time of his death. The next moment, as it happens in dreams, I am one of them. But for a splinter of a second, I'm both, the one watching the show and the one who has returned. And just before I might actually see myself on screen, the impressions separate and gives under its own weight. I begin to check my vitals the moment I arrive. By that, I mean I get to work tackling the urgent question of how do I tell myself apart from the living. The one condition, I gather, that afflicts the one who've come back seems to be this: an all-consuming feeling of something terminal and finished inside. It's just there. A tangible bleakness mounting with an irretrievable finality. Something inside your soul crouched so hard. It refuses to sit up, even if you were to beat it to submission. Now I'm looking around the alleyways, the schoolyard. Herds of the dead have come back all at once. In gray school uniforms, the students walk in clumps, arms around each other, laughing, making a bullying racket. There's the burnt bride, the dazed alcoholic who drowned face down in a ditch, the teenage girl who guttered down a pint of phenol. They all belong here, but I don't recognize them. It quietly dawns on me that this town is in fact not my town at all. The dead, as we know, readily accept and amplify any little familiarity. Only the women peek through windows, curious to get a glimpse of something, I can't tell what. Like me, they're perhaps catching up to it slowly. All the dead men, however, just look visibly embarrassed to be back, afraid of running into the living, huddling through the streets to the market square, hunched in the cold wind. They stare only at their feet going one in front of the other. Someone has told them to congregate here. The day is dimly lit by the shadow of a blown-out sun. Here now, they await instructions. If you have like a ghost poem, you could maybe follow it up. That would be fun.
I do have a ghost poem, but okay, yeah. It's called, let's see, let's go. Okay, so Rohan, a ghost poem. This one's called Baba Yaga, and the title refers to a Slavic witch with chicken legs, and I have this fascination for Soviet children's literature. So, Baba Yaga. No one but my cousin found it funny. My story about two boys under the banyan tree being approached by a figure in white at an ungodly hour. The apparition, as it turned out, was Baba Yaga, asking if they'd like curd or tamarind rice. What's to laugh at, those around pondered, confounded by our inside joke. As we rolled on the floor, repeating the names of those Tamil dishes, Tayir Sadam, Puli Sadam, in a possessed tone, not caring how silly we looked. I'd repeat the joke every summer I met him, always creating the same effect, until a long silence. By then, we were taller, mature. I moved to another continent, and like a return bracelet, the witch became all mine to keep. She'd awaken after some rum, emerge from behind an oak, push tiffin boxes under my nose. Trembling, I'd bring a spoonful of rice to my mouth, hear her chuckle in my boyhood voice. Okay, I think I'm going to read the title poem of my second book, which is called The Cosmonaut in Arjun's Rocket. So this poem's inspired by a historical incident, which is concerning the first Indian in space, Rakesh Sharma. When Indira Gandhi, who was the prime minister at the time, asked him how India looked from space, he said, "Sare jahan se acha." I think he was sort of, he didn't have any other option, he had to say that. So in any case, this poem sort of blends that with I also have this fascination for graphic novels, and a lot of us have, in India, I think, have grown up reading Tintin, and Arjun is the illustrator of Tintin. So this is from one of my Tintin series of poems. So the cosmonaut in Arjun's rocket. In his blog post, Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma fondly recollects stumbling across a copy of Destination Moon in his father's library, mulling over the rocket's red and white squares as HMT watches pushed the nation, its million prejudices glued with Fevicol, toward another era of fiascos. Reading between his lines, a portrait emerges, not of the stoical hero of the Soviet Union, but just a commoner whose honesty must navigate bad breath. In an excerpt from his fan fiction based on the boy reporter's adventures, the dog Snowy is renamed the dog Sorry, in what seems an ambitious attempt to address the feelings of the majority, its mangy grievances. And this leads me to speculate about his broadcast from space, flooding out of radios with patriotic fervor, concealing how sorry first became Sare, then Jahan se acha. Yeah, Rohan?
There's not much time left, as I'm being sort of indicated from this. So I'll read one from this book, Slow Startle. Both of our books are out there in the bookstore. And okay, I'll read this. I haven't opened this in a while, but I'm just going to read this poem. In this book, I have written like a series of elegies, but not exactly. It's just a poem which sort of talks about grief in one way or another. But anyway, this is called Elegy Written on a Clock Face with No Hands. Returning from the city late one winter night, the taxi I was in hit a stray dog crossing the highway. In my drunken haze, I felt the car shrug at the impact, and behind a primal yelping that grew fainter as the taxi decelerated to a halt. When I stepped out, I saw the edge of the bumper had blown apart, and the driver started walking back to the site without a word. He returned with a green metal cutout, holding it like a meteor fragment, one of his shoulders drooping a little with the weight of it. From where I stood under the row of street lights and the fog, I thought he was carrying the limp corpse of the dog by the neck fold. Earlier that evening at a party, I'd met a man in mourning. His son of 18 had killed himself a year ago while he was in another country, possibly cheating on his wife. He wasn't sure. And now drunk, he blamed this other woman and her country for his son's death. At some point in the evening, I remember wanting to tell him about my friend, who too had hung himself, and how I've always wanted to ask if he felt the beginning of a great regret somewhere in the middle of it, as his face darkened, seconds after he kicked the chair and the beast leaped out of him, before he finally saw the face of what he had done. Or if the last thing he ever felt was an unexpected surprise that the ceiling fan could actually hold his weight. Instead, I told him how death begins as a little rabid wolf perched on the threshold one day, hurt, shivering and drooling at the mouth. Outside, it is always raining in the dark, and the ones like us have to keep making up parables for all the dead we cannot account for. I think of that animal inside us, our double, that invisible will guiding the dog across the street that night, and how in the final moment when it sensed the glare of the headlights, a tiny shiver of warmth blew on the asphalt. And inside it, the other animal closed its weary eyes. In the slow startle, as the bumper smashed its ribs, it heard its own cry and heard the other voice inside it too. The brief howl that sounded so strange, so unlike its own. Thank you.
I think we have time for two more, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a short poem, and then I want Rohan to, this is one of my favorite poems by Rohan, and it's called The Difficult Mountain. So if you'd like to finish with that, would that be? Or do you want to read? I mean, anything else?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So Shumana Roy, she wrote a very respectful poem about a prime minister, and the spit poem. So this is sort of like that. It's political, and it's it talks about my deep reverence for this recent phenomenon called demonetization. So the title of the poem is a spin-off on Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. So it's called Demonetization, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Leader. The ATM queue outside my house stretches till the border. You're a patriot at either end, closer to bullets, or the machine acknowledging your demons with receipts. Every day you get to deposit half a nightmare or a diary page. The skydiver who drove me to work in his auto put his herpes into a savings account. He gave up jumping from planes after he saw the earth as our leader's face. A kitten on the umbrella of the lady standing in line before me mused that I shouldn't worry. Press the button next to yes to print 1001 questions you were always afraid to ask the pedophile. Or press no if that's what your silence meant. I kick the ATM. A soda tumbles out. Let's drink to the nation.
Okay, I'm going to quickly read this poem. It's called A Difficult Mountain. And this poem is very close to me because this was like the first poem that I ever published. A Difficult Mountain. A few days ago, since I had just received a paycheck, I offered to fund my mother's visit to the city. Yesterday, when I told her about the theft, we decided to cancel the trip for now. She wasn't surprised. She told me how every little grace that comes her way is leveled by fate. How she keeps coming back, raised right down to where she started from. Years of defeat have taught her humility. Like my discomfiture at the thought that the thieves looked right into my sleeping eyes and left is almost a feeling of violation. She tells me these days her dreams are of climbing uphill on a difficult mountain, where she is always falling short of footholds, or of climbing an endlessly long flight of stairs. And if she gets to the top somehow, she realizes there is no way back down. I try to tell her it should be fine, half pleased that she connects the metaphors, half scared she will understand their immensities suddenly one day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe one question. I think we are already done, but I just think.
Oh, wow. Okay. Who was that, Jerry? Or oh, thank you, Jerry. Well, flattered, but yeah. Well, all right. Thank you.
I think the main thing about this particular session were two different. It was fantastic, right?
Yeah, and a beetroot that wasn't allowed to become anything more than a salad. So some very refreshing imagery and lines and verses. Thank you so much. Arjun, as I was told, and Rohan.